What's up? Do you hear me okay? Cool, excellent. I think the stream has a delay, but if my voice ever gets a bit too quiet or the audio goes out, just let me know and I'll adjust it. Cool, then let's just start. So, this is a very basic introduction on Selenium, especially for WebDriverJS, which is the Node.js language bindings for Selenium. So first of all, what is Selenium? Selenium is a software that can be used for browser automation. So especially if you're doing QA or you're doing testing, it's super useful because you have a real browser that you'll be automating with a language, whether that's Java, Python, JavaScript, Ruby, and this just simply helps whether if you're trying to do things repetitively or run a regression script. So one of the big questions that I get is, which language binding should I use? Especially if you're a beginner, honestly, my recommendation is using Python or Ruby because it's a very beginner-friendly language and it's the closest thing to English. But in this screencast or this live stream, I'm going to actually show you how to do it using JavaScript, especially with Node.js. Node.js is obviously the thing that runs the JavaScript code, allows for server-based JavaScript code to be run. Cool. So to get started, first things first, you will need Node installed. If you're on Mac OS, you can easily install it if you just pull up your terminal. You can easily install it using brew. You could just do brew install Node and you'll get Node installed. Other than that, you can always install Node.js by going to the Node.js website, and there's an installation link there. Okay, so next step, I'm going to make a directory. I'm just going to call it WebDriverJS. And then change into that directory. So just to show you what Node version I'm using Major version 5. And along with Node, I have npm, which is the Node package manager. And I have Major version number 3. So in the directory, to use Selenium WebDriver, you'll need to install the npm package, Selenium WebDriver, which is this thing over here. And to install it is simply to run npm install Selenium WebDriver. So going back, if you're on the Selenium GitHub repository, if you want to browse the documentation, you can simply do a Google search of Selenium GitHub or search it in github.com. And in here, if you want to actually see the documentation, it's all in here. And for JavaScript, just click the link over here and it'll take you to the documentation page. So now we have Selenium WebDriver installed. You can now run it. So I'm going to actually do it very basically. I'm going to show you via the Node REPL of how to build a browser and simply do some very basic WebDriverJS things. So to enter the Node REPL, you just need to type Node, and now you're in a Node JavaScript REPL. REPL standing read, evaluate, print loop. So of course, although this won't be an introduction to JavaScript, I will go over some really basic JavaScript stuff just so that you can kind of understand what I'm doing in case you haven't had experience working with JavaScript. But the JavaScript language bindings is actually very similar to the Java ones. Of course, there are differences in the language, but it's written very similarly, so it's easy to pick up if you already know the Java Selenium language bindings. So, especially in all languages, you'll want to know how to create a variable. And to create a variable, you use var, and then whatever name you want to give it, I'm going to call it variable, and then you can set it to any kind of type. Here I'm just setting it to a number, but you can set it to a string if you use quotes. And if you see here in the REPL, it returns undefined because instantiating a variable doesn't return anything. Only a function call returns something. But if you type variable, hit enter, you'll see that it returns the value, which is 42. And to creating a function, to explain function short, think of it like a repeatable kind of step that you can use to create new outputs. So it can take 0 or more inputs and create an output out of that. So I'm going to instantiate it. I'm going to call it func. And then to create a function, you'll need the keyword function along with the parentheses. Here I have no parameters, but let's say I have one parameter. You can name the parameter whatever. The order is what matters in the arguments. I'm going to call it name, and then let's just say it returns hello and your name. So if you type func, it actually returns the constructor, the function. It doesn't really do anything. In order to call the function or invoke it, you surround it with the parentheses at the end. And you'll see here that it returns a string hello undefined. And the reason because of that is because you didn't pass any arguments. And so what the no argument, the name then became undefined. And then it just simply concatenated using typecasting hello undefined. To make it actually say an actual name, you can just pass in a string. And here you'll say hello Mark. And I think one other thing I'm going to mention too is just a basic overview of objects. In JavaScript, to create an object is simply to use the curly brace. Think of it like a hash where it's a key value pair. So if I have, let's say I named this key, and then let's set it to the value of the string value. So now object now has key and value. And if you want to actually have a function in the object, you can simply just create a property, let's call it method, and then set it to a function. And we already created func above, so by setting it like this, now we can call object method and then pass in the name, and then it actually executes or runs the function inside the object or the method. And finally, another thing I'll be using is console.log. Think of it like print in other languages, and it simply just logs something or displays something to the console or the terminal. And you can just say anything. and it'll just log foo, and of course it doesn't return anything. So given that you have WebDriver installed, now let's actually start coding into it. The first thing you want to do is, since you have it installed, you should be able to require it. So in order to use it in your Node.js script, you want to run require and then the name of the package. Of course, here you also want to set it to a variable. And I'm going to create a variable called WebDriver and set it to selenium-webdriver. Now, if you actually type WebDriver and hit enter, you'll see the entire methods and the things that you can use to call the module. And if you're curious, if you hit a dot and then hit tab in the REPL, it'll actually show you all the kind of properties or methods that comes with the WebDriver module. So the first thing that we want to do, of course, is actually build our browser or build our WebDriver. You can use any types of drivers you want to use. The easiest one out of the box is to use Firefox. That you just simply need to download the Firefox browser, and you can run command and open a WebDriver Firefox browser easily. I'm going to use Chrome because I like it because of its dev tools. But in order to use Chrome, you will need to install the Chrome driver. If you're on Mac OS, once again, and you have brew installed, you'll want to run brew install Chrome driver. I already have it installed, so I'm not going to run the command. So back into the REPL, here the first thing we want to do is create our builder. The builder is a constructor or a class, and you just run new WebDriver builder, and then you call it. And then if you type builder and hit it, you'll see that simply it's an instance of the builder class, and it looks like it's an object containing many properties. You'll see that you can set Chrome, Firefox, Opera, IE, Safari, Edge, and other environment options into here. And for me, I'm going to use, I'm going to set the builder, use the for-browser method. And in this method, you pass in the name of the browser you want to use. So for those using Firefox, you can just put in the string Firefox, but I'm going to use Chrome. And when I hit enter, you'll see now that in the capabilities, browser name is now set to Chrome. You might ask, okay, why do I have all these different types of options? Well, you have these options is because you can actually configure all the options of the multiple browsers, and then you can run the script opening multiple browsers. If you decide to run multiple browsers to test using Selenium, run multiple browsers in parallel. But of course, that's a more advanced topic, and we'll go over that in another time. So now with our Chrome, just to make things simple, now we create our driver. And to instantiate our driver, simply all we have to do is run builder and then run the build method and call it. And as you see here, now our Chrome has opened up. So let's look at driver, and you'll see that it's just a bunch of methods inside of it. One thing to note that I won't go into too much detail is that because JavaScript is an asynchronous language, meaning that it's non-blocking and it's a single event loop, the entire Node.js API for Selenium WebDriver is promise-based, and they have their own kind of control flow in which they handle promises. So normally you might have this pyramid of doom kind of thing where like you must in order to open a browser, you need to then have a callback to then do something after that, and then that callback, it'll get crazier and crazier with the pyramid of doom. This is all promise based, but then they actually did something in order to prevent you from having to chain then multiple times. It's all handled in a single control flow where you can call a command like you normally do in the Java API, and it actually then gets queued into a promise handler. And so it looks like synchronous code, but it's actually async. So let's also take a look at the driver methods. And you'll see here that there's a bunch of driver methods that you can use. This is pretty useful sometimes when you forget a method name or you're just curious what the methods are that you can use for your driver. And they are all over here. So let's do the most basic thing. Let's open up a web page. To do that, you run the get method, and you then pass in a string with the absolute URL. So let's just do a very basic one. Google, everybody knows that. And if you take a look on the left, there it is. Google has loaded. So to do another basic thing, let's also try to get the title. So when we create a variable title, and then we do driver.getTitle, we would just assume that title now is the string, right? Actually, I mentioned before, because it's a promise, it returns a promise, and to prove it to you, you can just do a quick check, and you'll see that WebDriver even tells you that it's a promise. And so then in order to get the actual title, you need to then put a then at the end. And then the promise simply means that's an eventual return of the value, because it doesn't know, since it's async, when the value will return. And here, I'm just going to call the return value for the title t. It's a string. I'm just going to console log t. And if you actually look, there it is. It matches the title over here. So, I mean, at this point, we've now built a browser, but you've been typing all this in the REPL, and you're like, okay, how can I keep this script that I've just typed? Do I have to open a new text editor and go through my REPL history and then copy and paste all the commands? No. The REPL actually has some pretty nice, useful commands in here. If you type period, and then if you look at it, all these kind of helper utilities, you can actually do .save, and then you can give it a file name. I'm going to call it script.js, hit enter, and actually the node REPL session or the history is now saved into that file. So just to show you, if I do a .exit, I'm out of the REPL now. And here I actually have now a script file that now I can open. I'm open within my text editor, and let me just make it full screen. Here you'll see that all the commands that we ran in the REPL. Let me just simply remove the things that I don't need. Get title, let's promise. Cool. So I'm going to keep this part, but this time I'm going to change it to a little website that I have. It's simply a static server, and it'll have some things some test fixtures, which will make it easier for me to show you some of the WebDriverJS commands. So I'm going to save the file, go back into my node REPL. Unfortunately, I actually didn't quit the driver. To quit it, actually, what should have been run was driver.quit, and call that function. Because it creates a new Chrome every single time you build a driver, you'll have to manually close your Chrome browser. So now go back into node REPL, and then now we can load script.js. And boom, you'll see that this is the title of the page, and we're actually on this web page. Excellent. So here I'm going to actually just go into this static page elements, and let me just make it a little bigger so you can see. And if you actually see it, let me just show you also. Inspect element in the Chrome browser, and let me make this part bigger as well. So one of the useful things that you want to do with WebDriver is you want to actually get an element. So how will we do that? Well, let's look at our driver. Our driver is here, but let's look at the methods in driver. In driver, there's actually things called find element, find elements. So let's use that. Find element. Now, here we do want to pass in something. So before we actually do find element, you want to the WebDriver will need to know what kind of element you want to find it and how you want to find the element. There's something in WebDriver called by, WebDriver.by. So those who are familiar with the Java API, by will simply return a bunch of methods that you can then pass in to get the element. So if you prefer to use tag name or ID or CSS, class name or XPath, you can simply run it. And just to show you, let's say by tag name, let's just put, H1 for example. And you'll see what it does is just simply returns a object that then will be used in the find element, and find element will then follow those instructions to then find that element. So let's find an element. Let's find the button, for example, which is the one right over here, this thing. And do by, and then we'll do it by the tag name, and it's simply the string button. Now it obviously closed my inspect element panel, but how do we know if it selected it? Well, what you can do is let's just get the text of the element. So element.getText. As you can guess, getText returns a promise. So then we need to chain a then, and then here, let's simply just log the text. As you can see right over here, there's the name inside the button. So let me just go over actually an alternative to using by, because that can be a bit verbose, and there's actually an easier way to do it using the Node.js API, the WebDriverJS API that is, and that is to use driver.findElement, for example, and then you can actually pass in an object. And remember, an object has a key, and the key here is, let's say, class name or ID or XPath, and then this thing, actually, this is actually just named after the class itself, which is the class. And then you'll also see that it selected it. Sometimes it does that. And then if we get the text of that element, element.getText, and then just log it again, you'll see that it logged the text class. Excellent. And for those who prefer using CSS selector, you can always do driver find element and then instead use CSS. And then you can pass in some CSS rules, like for example, ID or this. And in this regard, since you use find element, the singular, it only returns one element. And let's just quickly show you another alternative method you can use. So getText is the thing we've been using. There are a bunch of other things. You can clear the value if it's like a button or input. You can click it. You can continue to find more elements within the element, elementception. You can get the attribute, get the CSS value, the parent driver, ID, location, size, all these kind of things. Another thing that I find useful is to get the HTML. So let's do get. Hold on, let me just do a driver dot find element again. Oops. Set element to this. And then element dot get. See. Actually, wait. Get inner HTML. I think I may have called it on the wrong thing, but that's okay. So, let me show you then another now how to find elements. To find elements, you want to use var elements and then set driver.find elements. And here, you can now pass in, let's say here I'm going to use CSS and find all the li elements under ul, the list element. And once again, it's a promise, as you can see here. In order to get it, now when you use a chain of then, it actually returns elements as an array in this regard. So let me just write it like this. And then if I console log else.length, you'll see that you have 3, which is the 3 bullet pointed items over here. So in order to go through each one, you'll technically need to write a for loop. So let me do that. The for each, and then I'm just going to get the text again in this regard. And you'll see that the first line, lorem, second, consector, and third, sed, which matches this. As you can see there already, it feels like, oh man, there's a bunch of callbacks, or we might be reaching our new pyramid of doom. WebDriver actually has their own way of managing their promise. If you look at WebDriver, there's a promise. And in here, there are a bunch of methods that you can call. Something I find useful is to use the map promise. And here what you do is you pass in the WebDriver element promise, which is here in elements, and then you can then simply manage that promise for you, and then you can run the command. This is obviously a little cleaner in my opinion. And you see that it returns the same thing. And Finally, since this is just simply a basic introduction of finding elements, you can, if you want to close your driver, which I didn't do before, you can run driver.quit. And once doing that, the driver is now gone. If you want to save the script again, you can give it a new file name and call it save script2.js. And there you go. I think that'll be a very basic introduction on Selenium. If you have any questions, I think maybe in the next video, I'll go more over how to do waits. So then, for example, if you have a spa and you have an asynchronous page and it's loading elements using Ajax, then you need to use the wait method in order to, for example, wait for until a condition. Because the way WebDriverJS works is, since it's a browser and the browser thinks of everything synchronously, what it'll do is it'll be constantly polling until a condition is true, like until an element is found, and then it will then return the element. And that's how it handles more of the asynchronous things happening in the browser. And then perhaps I can go over things like how to set up testing with Mocha. And then you can now write tests and have, assertion conditions to check if elements are there or text is there or things are clickable. Can you hear me now? Okay, then let me just end the live stream now. Thanks for joining.